SaaS Backwards is sponsored by Austin Lawrence Group, specializing in demand gen for SaaS. It sure is noisy. I deleted 100 emails from vendors just this morning. Your buyer has gotten better at ignoring you, and you're gonna need a big idea if you want to cut through all that clutter. Austin Lawrence is just the right agency to help you find it. So if your campaigns are falling on deaf eyeballs, let's talk. Visit austinlawrence.com today and let's build something bigger.
Welcome to the SaaS Backwards podcast, where we reverse engineer the success of fast-growing SaaS firms and explore strategies CMOs and CEOs are using to drive their businesses forward.
Welcome to SaaS Backwards, a podcast that helps SaaS CMOs and CEOs to accelerate growth and enhance profitability. Our guest today is Melissa Rosenthal, Chief Creative Officer at ClickUp, an all-in-one productivity platform that brings teams, tasks, and tools together all in one place. Hey, Melissa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Awesome. And before we dig in, could you just tell me a little bit more about yourself and your company, ClickUp?
Yeah, of course. So previous to SaaS, I was actually in media for 10 plus years. I was very early at a company called BuzzFeed, where we built, effectively what is known today as kind of like mainstream internet culture. It was really exciting. I was one of the first 10 people at that company. So what started off as an experiment and kind of turned into, a name brand company, which is really amazing. And I learned a lot there. I'm sure we'll go into some of this, but I learned a lot there about, how people connect with content and what emotionally resonates. And, I've taken a lot of that throughout my career and applied it to where I am today. And then after BuzzFeed, I went to help start a company called Cheddar, which is a live media company focused on the intersection of business and news culture. And we were, competing against the big dogs, CNBC, Fox Business, MSNBC. We built that and sold it in 3.5 years to a larger cable company. And now I wanted to take my brand and media expertise over to the land of SaaS. And now I'm here at ClickUp. I've been here a little over 2.5 years, focused on building the brand and really differentiating us in market through, best in class creative and marketing.
Well, that's awesome. It's like you're the good luck charm then on the startup, huh? Sounds like it's 3 for 3 here.
Had some good luck with startups. Yes.
That's pretty exciting. And, we wanted to talk about that growth trajectory at ClickUp. And even though you've grown so much, you're still really taking on some larger players, really, big gorillas in the marketplace. And can you talk a little bit about how you're helping this firm to punch above its weight?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started at ClickUp, we were about 60 people. We're about 1,000 now. So we've seen like an extreme amount of hyper growth. But, just because we were 60 people didn't mean for me and, for Zab and leadership that we shouldn't really punch up to the companies that we aspired to be one day. So, at Last Scenes of the World, the, Monday.com at that time, and really figure out a way to put ourselves in the room with them in every conversation. And a big way of doing that is really taking big risks, big bets, punching up, doing things that, other companies might not do to really make sure that you're able to kind of make noise and differentiate yourself. So we believed from an early day, that we had the ability to punch up and we would see ourselves in the room with these larger competitors and to not fear them, but to kind of, go up against them. And that was definitely the route that we took early on that we still take today.
Yeah, it's a little audacious, right? Which maybe grants you some permission to take creative steps you might not otherwise take. And I think it'd be good for you to talk a little bit about what those early steps were, what risks you were willing to take and what the creative platforms were.
Yeah, absolutely. So, early on, even when I joined, there was definitely like a personality that the brand was beginning to have, which I latched onto and I was definitely attracted to, which was kind of a humorous take on the idea of ditching your other platforms for ClickUp. So when you would import from a competitor, you'd get a pretty funny email with a funny graphic that you had completed your import and everything else was in the toilet. So, we definitely kind of had that going for us day one. And I really was able to just take that and run with it and say that, hey, there's kind of this ability when you see a competitor that is very publicly memed on and talked about in mainstream culture, where it almost becomes a commentary on something that is already publicly talked about, that gives you that runway to be able to take it and say, all right, we can probably do something here that will land well if we take a smart, humorous route. So one of the risks that we took was we launched a pretty heavy, large marketing campaign against Jira, in which we created several performance ads that were quite funny, but also very much like, firing Jira. We created a fake pharmaceutical ad called a beta tool. And there were a ton of, other elements of this campaign, email campaigns and discounts and things that went along with these ads. But I think there was a lot of audacity in that campaign. And, I think anything like that will certainly be polarizing just in terms of the competitive sparring. But I think that there's a lot of fun that can be had with that. And I think a lot of consumers, a lot of buyers actually appreciate competitive, jabs and competitive sparring, especially if it's done well and tastefully. So, we took a big risk in creating this kind of Jira campaign in which we poked fun at them in really fun and creative ways, and it paid off for us. So that was one of our very early, I would say, big bets and risks that we took, and something that definitely made noise and differentiated in the way that we market ourselves.
I think the competitive contrast format is pretty well respected here in the US, especially in B2B. There's plenty of consumer examples. I mean, going way back, the young cola, there's certainly ways to position yourself against an entrenched competitor.
Yep.
I know it's really good here, but do you guys operate globally?
Yeah, internationally. I think in certain countries it's actually illegal, but at the time it was very heavily, Americas. We're a global company now. We have teams in, EMEA and APAC, in which that probably wouldn't resonate as well. We did run the ad now internationally, and it didn't get blocked in any countries. It was polarizing, right? There were people in other countries that it wasn't even commentary on the ad. It was just commentary for the format, right? That competitive, without focusing entirely on yourself. And I think that was just par for the course of doing the style of what we did. We knew that would happen. And the rule of thumb is, if less than 5% of the commentary is negative, then, you're on the right track. And for the most part, people really enjoyed the ads and would comment and share them and say, these are the only ads I'd actually watched from front to back. And, I think that's a testament to just the fact that they were well done. Like, it's easy enough to bash on a competitor and just create something that for the sake of doing it. But I think people really appreciate thoughtful advertising. And that's what we were trying to do with that series, not just bash our competitors, but show the differentiation between our company and theirs, and then also do it in a really humorous and funny way.
Yeah. And, there's not enough good creative out there. It's one of my great concerns in contemporary marketing is so much of it's kind of average. So it's nice to stand out on the legs of creativity. So
yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate it. I think we should just try and dig a little bit more on the value of creative. We don't get to talk enough about that on the podcast. So you're going to be the flag bearer for creative for this episode. And I think people have the belief that it's really expensive to do great creative. And I'm wondering if you can talk about how you place your bets and, the differing production standards and budgets you work with and how you make those great creatives not too terribly expensive.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And it definitely doesn't need to be cost prohibitive, but it is an investment. If you want to create great things, you need to have great people and you need to invest in them. So it's certainly like a decision to invest in creative or not. And there are places that take an ad hoc approach in which they enlist. I think this is actually the most overused tactic in B2B right now, which is funny. But, utilizing like Ryan Reynolds to do like one ad campaign, and then it's like you blow millions of dollars in this one ad campaign, utilizing Ryan Reynolds' agency to create this very expensive piece of creative for you, and then expect virality because he posts it, and then expect a long tail of that virality. So there's that approach. But what we do is actually way less expensive because we invested in the equipment and the people to be able to do it. So any one of our ads does not cost more than, at a very high end, like $10,000. And these are the highest tier of ads that we create, right? And they look like anything you would expect out of a major creative agency doing these that would probably cost hundreds of thousands. Any marketer you ask if they're working with an agency, say, we'll tell you how much they charge. And on the media side, used to charge way more for that stuff too, because there's this inherent markup. So just knowing the back end of it and what it actually costs to produce versus the markup that you're being charged, that's really where it becomes cost prohibitive. But if you invest in it and you do it regularly and you treat it as both really great ad creative, but a media strategy, you're able to really leverage, the in-house work and the in-house team that you have. And, we put out videos now pretty much 3 times a week, 3 ads that are basically, it's content that's also an ad, speaks to the pain points of work, speaks to modern technology, AI, things that will impact work, pain points. So, we're putting out 3+ pieces of content a week. And I mean, most of those pieces of content, like, they're free to create for us, minus the overhead. And then, on the expensive side, $500. So, I mean, the creative that we're able to create that looks like movie studio quality content costs us less than $500. So it doesn't have to be expensive.
So some of those costs are like, I think there were some costumes in some of the things I've seen. So
yeah, you buy a wig on Amazon. Yeah, that's part of it. But yeah, it's mostly props. I mean, everything else, we're writing everything in-house. We're creating everything in-house. We're shooting everything in-house. And we're utilizing just our team to do it. It doesn't have to be expensive. I think it's the right messaging. It's the right team working on it. And, that's really what it should be. Not you spend $1 million on an ad campaign for an agency to go create it. I think that's a waste of money. And I also think, like, maybe this is controversial, but like the idea of like an ad campaign that is supposed to hit a home run rather than creating a lot of different relevant messages that still tie to that overarching message that can run, consistently throughout a longer period of time, where you're creating, hundreds of pieces of content and you're hitting maybe doubles and triples, maybe 1 home run. I think that's a way better strategy than just banking everything on a single campaign.
So there's a few things there. I just want to unpack them a little bit from my perspective. Number one is the case for an in-house resource, in-house agency. And I think if you have a driving creative force, props to you, an in-house agency can really do a great job. Right? It's something of a challenge to stay fresh, but I think that might be an interesting counterweight to the challenge of affording outsourced help, especially at that scale, right? It gets prohibitive at the scale you're operating. Having great team members on that, in-house team, focusing on pain points. So this is where we like to focus our work, is what actually is going to move a prospect off the status quo. And so regardless of how you're implementing your creative or content, and regardless of it, if you don't focus on that. And I think the idea of a portfolio approach to creative versus the, boy, I hope this is it. They used to call it the spectacular. I've worked for some CEOs that get a spectacular idea in their head, and that's going to be the $1 million investment. It's really, I think you're smart. Hey, let's put 30 pieces of creative. And if one of them really hits well, we can add on to it, right? So if the guys running around in Beatles wigs is the thing that creates the memes, let's double down or triple down on that, right? So you can try a lot more things in that way of organizing yourself. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it also depends on kind of how you look at ads, right? Like, we're constantly doing performance advertising and you're constantly refreshing the messaging there and you're constantly iterating on that. So when you're thinking about larger campaigns, why don't just think about your entire content strategy as a campaign, like an evergreen campaign that pivots the messaging over time, but also speaks to relevant things that potential buyers and customers are dealing with. That isn't just one message. Because also, I mean, you try to get a bunch of stakeholders aligned on a single idea and a single encompassing message that hits within a video that's 60 to 90 seconds. And I will tell you, I mean, it is very challenging. Everything is subjective and creative, right? And the ability to get every single point of messaging in there that tells this idyllic story that will speak to every single one of your potential buyers or ICPs is just not the reality. So I believe in the portfolio approach now more than ever.
That gives you some license too to say, yes, Fred, you're right, but that's next week. This week we're going to do this stuff. Next week we'll get to exactly what you've talked about.
And there can be that, hero video that you produce once a quarter that, speaks to a more broad spectrum of the key outcomes that your product or software delivers on. I think that's fine. But should you spend $1 million on that idea? Like, probably not. That doesn't seem like a great risk or investment.
So I want to suggest something. Tell me what you think. Maybe this is actually less risky for people like you, the marketing leadership, because you're not married to the one thing that has to be perfect, right? You have the ability to say, hey, yeah, we hit, 3 doubles, 2 triples, and a couple of home runs this quarter, instead of we put all our eggs in this one basket and it fell flat. So,
yeah, I think that there's like the approach on what you're doing with performance marketing, which I totally believe that. Like, not every piece of creative is going to have the CAC and CAC payback that you're looking for. And then like the content strategy that's evergreen, it's hard to completely attribute direct dollar for dollar ROI, but if you're not spending that much money on it and it's bringing people in, then your doubles and triples are well worth it.
We didn't really talk about this, and it's just a point of information for listeners. Is this a product-led growth motion at ClickUp?
Well, the company grew primarily through PLG, but we do have a sales assist motion. We have a sales team as well.
So you're doing both at this time?
Yes.
Got it. So I think it's interesting that there aren't a huge number of chief creative officers at SaaS firms. So kind of shifting gears a little bit, do you have any advice for folks who believe themselves to be creative leaders, considering career in SaaS?
Yeah, I think that there is so much opportunity and a lot less noise. Like, you can be a creative leader in a B2C company and that's fine, but you're kind of competing in this just like ultra saturated playground, where in SaaS, I think things have been done the same way for so long that there's just a lot more like of that blue sky opportunity. That's why I wanted to jump as a creative person into SaaS, because I was just like, this is so boring. Like, there's no way that it needs to be done this way. There's just no possible way that the end buyers, like, regardless of their seniority level, wouldn't appreciate great advertising and humorous advertising that can accompany product-led advertising. So yeah, I thought that there was a really cool opportunity to be a differentiated brand through that personality and persona and perspective, honestly. And yeah, I think you ask anyone why things haven't been shaken up in any industry, and it's like, because things are done the way that they're done. And if you don't bring in external experience and external perspectives on things from other industries, you're not going to get that, because why change and also risk and change are scary things.
Yeah, look, I think there's far too little creativity in software marketing. And, there's both an art and a science to it, and the art doesn't get practiced enough. So
yeah.
So we're throwing down the gauntlet for more creative and SaaS.
Like, over the past year, I'm definitely starting to see some companies, bubble up and experiment with their creative and have fun and be more colorful and bold. So I would say, like, we're probably on the path to that changing, because you have to stand out. And in a completely democratized tech environment where product, you can only leapfrog for how long, you have to be able to stand out, and you can do that through great branding and great creative.
I think you're absolutely right. And so for those considering a shift from B2C to B2B, this might be a great time as it's becoming more accepted, right? So you're still early enough in the adoption of branding in the B2B SaaS space.
Yeah. Well, one piece of advice on that, I guess, is that B2C tends to be more risk tolerant. So if, you're a creative person, you're a brand builder, and you want to make that move, or you want to go into B2B SaaS, just make sure that you have buy-in and, the ability to actually execute and take risks from leadership, because that's been very important for me, and my ability to do anything that I've done here was the buy-in from day one, and the commitment and honor to that commitment that I would be able to do those things. And, it's been great, but I can also see the back end of that. If, you have an overzealous leadership team that thinks they want it, but don't actually want to do it. And then you go in there with a ton of creative ideas, and then they're all just kind of squashed because they're afraid. So it goes both ways. I think you just have to have the people that are willing. And part of what, I think is really interesting about ClickUp is our founder is not, a SaaS veteran. He hasn't founded 10 other SaaS companies. And I think that in some ways, he, was more risk tolerant to like, hey, this is the way I believe marketing should be too. And we aligned on that very early on.
That's terrific. And I really think we should encourage more people sort of early mid-career, 10, 12 years solid experience outside of B2B to take a look here. Hope we can do that through this podcast and through your example. I think that's really awesome. So I want to talk about this being courageous thing, this the audacity and courageous, like naming competitors. We touched on it earlier, but first of all, I want to make sure we get to the point, like, why did we do it? Why did you do that here? What were you seeking to gain? And then what else are you doing that you might think is also a little, shaking the earth a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that from day one, like that was the idea. It was we needed to shake the earth a little bit. And even if, from our very bold taglines and out of home billboard strategy, which was just like we basically saturated all of the markets with knowledge workers that we wanted to go after, that we knew our competitors would also be in. And all of a sudden, we did that first, and we saw our competitors put up ads next to ours because they realized that that was working. And, it's like to think of something, it's a billboard strategy, right? It's
Right.
physical
You went
billboards.
outdoor, right? You guys went out.
Yeah. Yeah. And we invested a lot of money in that. Very early on, we tested the waters with, okay, here's how we'll do it. We'll test a few markets. And if it works with our brand awareness versus our competitive set, we'll continue to do that. And the only way to do that is to completely saturate these markets. Like you can't just stick a billboard up in an area and expect that it's going to work for you. But we completely saturated these markets. We strategically picked out, I mean, I was doing this myself, picking out every single unit where it would be located, if it was located next to our competitive set's office, or where people could not ignore it. Like these would be everywhere. And it definitely worked. I mean, people reference our billboards all the time. We know that they've allowed us to hire really great talent. They're bold, they're big, they say a lot and say a little at the same time. And, I think that was definitely a huge risk and kind of like a big bet that we took, that, again, not a competitive jousting competition. We were able to position ourselves next to our competition, physically next to our competition, whether it's their offices or their own billboards, and in their cities. So I think that was really powerful. I mean, that put us on the map as much as our other advertising strategy. So I think it's kind of like infusing this boldness and this risk taking and this noise making in sort of every little thing that you do. And once you're doing that and you're sort of firing on all those cylinders, then you really start to see the return on that.
Yeah, I think the being willing to get out of the digital space is really important. I think it's overlooked by too many marketers. I mean, direct marketing still very powerful, maybe even more so, because people don't pay for the stamp, and out of home, same thing. It's not inexpensive to ramp, but boy, it can really power awareness and interest, right? Which is a big part of the path. So I think that's awesome.
Absolutely.
So how do you marry this up to driving real KPIs? You alluded to it when you were talking about outdoor.
Yep.
So what are you doing to help the CFO continue to buy in? Because I'm sure that's a dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, that was a very early, like, we have to get ourselves on the board. Like, we're not on the board. So if we're not on the board, then it doesn't matter what we do. No one will pay attention to us anyway. So there's an early investment you make into things like outdoor and out of home to really build your brand equity and allow yourselves to be in that position. It doesn't mean you continue that for years and years. You take a pause, you reevaluate. Obviously, economic conditions change. So you don't continually make the same investments in the same channels. But at the same time, there are other really efficient ways to keep going. And as I mentioned, like our now digital billboard strategy, which is this evergreen content machine portfolio approach, costs us next to nothing. So the ability for us to be able to do that in lieu of spending, millions of dollars on out of home, we're able to accomplish the same things. And also now we have the brand equity behind us. So, when you've kind of been able to like lift yourselves up through both that and then taking risks like this Jira campaign and making noise in the market, you can shift your strategy, and it's a lot easier because you've already built the brand equity that to get yourself there and in that position.
And I think it's interesting. We have to talk a little bit about how this is funded. It wasn't sort of in our prep, but was there venture funding that helped make this possible? I mean, where was the firm in its fundraising rounds?
Yeah, I mean, I can operate with a very small budget and I can operate with a very large budget. And, I think it's just where you are as a company and what the market at the time allows you to do. And you shift and you pivot and you have wartime and peacetime strategies that can both make noise. And I think both have a big impact. When I started, we were Series A. So I had basically no marketing budget, very small. We were just starting to test out channels in very small ways, but we wanted to make a splash in everything that we did. So every single opportunity, which is what I call it, which is like that next level of investment into any other channel or any channel at all, would be differentiated and would be creative. So it was less like, how much do I have? And more just like, where do we get to play and where should we allow ourselves to play? And how do we differentiate in every single one of those aspects? So if, even through social, through organic social or through slightly boosted posts, if we had a weekly feature release, we would create a song and put that song behind it that was made by one of our in-house employees. And now actually they just released an album. We have an album and that was done entirely through our employees. So there's a lot of creative and it has 1 million streams on Spotify. So there are things you can do internally that don't cost that much money, utilizing your own employees and your talent that don't cost that much. It's really just kind of figuring out how to differentiate yourself in every single thing that you do and caring about those small details because they matter.
And I think also expanding what the meaning of creative is, right? So here's a
Yeah.
creative way to harness the talent in your own firm, zero marginal cost,
Yeah.
and 1 million
Yeah.
streams. That sounds like
Yeah.
something.
And at one point, we did, I would say, ramp up on, we raised our Series B and then our Series C, and we ramped up on our marketing spend. And we were taking big, bold bets with ramping up on out of home and ramping up with, obviously we did a Super Bowl commercial, but we still did that in a pretty smart way. You're going to spend a lot of money no matter what. But, what we did was we mirrored our out of home strategy that we'd been running for about a year and a half that had proven to work. We didn't do a national buy. We did a geo-targeted buy to those cities. And we were able to leverage, the equity that we had already built with out of home. So now they're seeing ClickUp again on the biggest, stage of the world. And what we did was we didn't do it out externally. We didn't source an agency. We didn't spend millions of dollars on the creation of the ad. We did it for less than $200,000 in-house. So, there are expensive bets that you can still do creatively and strategically. And, the whole Super Bowl campaign was incredibly smart and strategic, even though it was a larger investment. So there's still things that you can do that are differentiated even when you do place those big bets.
That's awesome. So you've been there from 60 to like more than 1,000 employees, right? How has that been from your work life? What is that experience like? I don't think many people have experienced that, certainly not in that kind of time frame.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I've done the whole like 0 to 1,000 thing. Well, I mean, at BuzzFeed, we went from 10 to 1,500 over 6 years. So still a lot of growth, but slower than this. It was still, you are working 24/7, but you are building something. You are building it from the ground up. And I think that's like in, every startup ever, that crucial time of the first year, the first 2-3 years are so important, no matter how fast you're growing. So I think maybe the reference was it my work-life balance or just like, what is it like?
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly the work-life balance is the obvious question, right? Because it's going to be hard to have that. But also, I imagine the organization you're part of in marketing has changed dramatically.
Oh, yeah.
And sort of navigating that building out and, how do you infuse people with your vision for how marketing is going to run?
Yeah, I mean, the beauty of, I think what I was able to do at an early stage here with my team was build brand equity enough that people were joining the company also because of our marketing strategy. So you kind of have not full buy-in, but you have buy-in from people that are joining because they're already so familiar with like the great marketing that you're doing. So there is this element of just like, oh, wow, like I joined ClickUp because I love the advertising so much. I was at your competitor, but like, this is what drove me here. So, of course you have to kind of like, as you scale and as you grow, there are so many teams and so many people, and you have to like make sure that ethos and that personality is driven throughout the entire company. But also at the same time, you have a lot of people that join because of that to begin with. So it's embedded in them, and culturally they're there because of a lot of that. And we also have like 5 very key core values that I think embody our tone as a brand and also embody every single person that works at the company, which is really important. And I think the combination of like people being bought in with our marketing strategy and why they join, and then the ethos of the people who we really want to work here, who work best here and will thrive here, it marries itself in a way. It's really interesting to see that overlap.
How much of your marketing team is remote versus in the office?
So our entire growth org, I would say the majority of the team is hybrid, although the majority of my direct team is here on the ground. And that, I mean, I believe in hybrid work, of course. I think tools like ours make it really easy to do hybrid work and work async, but to actually do like production and work with creative people, Zoom isn't really a replacement for that. And if we're shooting things, like we all need to be here and be a part of that. So the majority of my team is directly located in San Diego, but also by choice. Like, a lot of creative people want to be around creative energy. I don't think there are many creatives who like really enjoy, and some do, working like completely alone. They want to be a part of that team, that energy. When I'm in the office today, when I come into the office, I go over to like our space and there is this energy that's buzzing because it's like, all right, this is what we're doing. This is what we're working on. And that gets everyone excited. It increases productivity and collaboration. So I'm a believer in hybrid work. I think it's what works for you, what works for your team. But for certain creative people, they need to be together.
Yeah, totally agree. So my last question, my new favorite question. What would you do differently looking back over the last 2.5 years, and why?
What would I do differently? It's a good question.
Yeah.
It's tough because there's a lot of things that I like. I mean, we tested so much, we failed a lot, we learned a lot. We're in a really good spot for where we are. I mean, I don't know. I think so early on to be at where we are now, like it's hard to say that I would really change much. I think like all of the learnings and the experimentation like have led us to the path that we're on, which is really, we're in a solid position. And I don't know, I don't think I would change that much. I think it's been just like enormous growth for myself personally, professionally, and for the company. And I think we've done a really great job in markets. So it's hard for me to say that. I think it's just, we were able to take a ton of risks. I don't know. I don't think I would do anything differently.
Well, it's an interesting perspective to look back at that. And I think it's perhaps this test and learn, willingness to fail, that here you are 2.5 years or so into it and you don't have too many regrets, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's not like 2.5 years later and I'm like, wow, our 3 big bets failed. Like we constantly were iterating and testing and learning and failing and iterating. And it's just that cycle that I think allows you to progress and not have so many regrets. And I think you're always moving towards that next like post, right? You always move the goalpost. And if you get to the first goalpost and you get to move it, then you've succeeded in what you're looking to accomplish. And that goalpost will always move, hopefully forever, right? But I think if you're able to get there, then you shouldn't have too many regrets.
That's awesome. Hey, thanks so much for making time for us today. If people want to reach you or learn more about ClickUp, how do they do that?
Yeah, I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. I post there a lot. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. I respond to pretty much everyone, as long as it's a nice message and you're not trying to just like throw some sort of blank cold email at me. But I'm really easy to reach and contact. You should absolutely check out ClickUp. It's been a game changer for even our own team. We were able to do everything in one spot, and we changed the way that we've worked completely. And instead of losing time on inefficiencies, we're able to really be efficient and collaborative in one place. So check out ClickUp, clickup.com. Easy to find. Please sign up today, and that will be for the amazing product that I work for.
That's terrific. Well, thanks again. And if you want to reach me on LinkedIn, it's LinkedIn/in/Ken Lempit. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do so wherever podcasts are distributed. And thanks again, Melissa Rosenthal. Awesome episode.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the SaaS Backwards podcast, brought to you by Austin Lawrence Group. We're a growth marketing agency that helps SaaS firms reduce churn, accelerate sales, and generate demand. Learn more about us at www.austinlawrence.com. You can email Ken Lempit at kl@austinlawrence.com about any SaaS marketing or customer retention subject. We hope you'll subscribe, and thanks again for listening.